everyone. Welcome to Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And you're in the middle of the book that we're going through by a new author for the show, but not new for us, J.P. Moreland, called Scientism and Secularism, Learning to Respond to a Dangerous Ideology. And we've kind of hit the main points a little bit for the heading there of where you identified our term. We attended to it. Hopefully we've memorized it at some point in time. We've told stories about it, and now we're operating in the expressing.
We didn't tell stories on it, but we told stories.
Right. As a result of it, and showed why it was this dangerous idea, and how it, even though the holders of it tend to want to hit you over the head with it to be able to say science and nothing but the science, so help you science. Actually, what they're doing is philosophy, and that falls outside the realm of science. Now, science has a lot of philosophical underpinnings that holds it up and does a lot of heavy lifting. And that's what Moreland's trying to get at, is that the difference between scientism and science are a great divide. And the way that scientism, or people that hold to scientism, tend to extrapolate from their arguments, they seem to equivocate too much on their audience not knowing the difference between the 2 points. And he's trying to make that point even more so. And so as we go on here to chapter 6, we've talked about the strong scientism, those who hold kind of that idea that there's nothing outside the norms of natural science that give you truth. And then there are other people that kind of hold, well, there might be other ones. And so he, in this chapter, in chapter 6, why weak scientism is no better than strong scientism. He's going to go after the other head of the Hydra here and see if we can't take them both out, as it will be. All right, so starting in chapter 6, then, he starts off by saying, these days, if an accepted scientific claim comes into conflict with an accepted non-scientific claim from another discipline, such as theology, which claim must be set aside? And if you've been into our comments section, you know, especially for people who haven't watched any other part other than maybe the clip or even the title that they're responding to, this is the claim that's being charged against us even here. So it's quite ironic that we're asking this question. Well, our culture, the scientific claim, always wins. Why? Simply because it is scientific. Again, we've been through the big periods of history, and it seems like we've given each area a chance, but the scientific community keeps pumping out computer chips and rockets and other various doodads that we can physically hold. And so who can argue with progress that way? And so I think that tends to be a little bit why the model for that tends to win the day and is flashy for the studio audience there, is because it's able to produce, where if you're meeting even with your most famous philosopher, you maybe get a chalkboard, or if they make chalkboards anymore, or a whiteboard, and he may be able to do a little bit of P'ing and Qing and R and S'ing, but there's not a whole lot there that you may be able to.
I'm glad you added Q, R, and S to that.
Make it a little bit more difficult on us.
Yeah.
So then he goes on to say that appealing to science to back one's claims is a conversation stopper that settles the issue. And so here we end the book. It can be all done. We just need to know that as long as we define our terms well, science is the one that always wins out, and we can close our Bibles and just open up to your science textbook.
Right. Yeah. Not so fast, my good friend, right? So he's already suggested that scientism, as you mentioned, has a foundation and philosophical foundations to support it. And so it can't be the only, way to truth, right? The only true or only way to knowledge is whatever science says, because in order to defend the various philosophical underpinnings of science, you need philosophy to do that. So now he's looking at weak scientism, which says, okay, well, some stuff may be true, but in the end, science always wins if there's a conflict. That's the basic idea, right? He says weak scientism encourages us to look only at the authority of science, and here's the problem, and not to examine the actual arguments. And so weak scientism, he tells us, allows for truth apart from science, right? That's the idea of science. According to weak scientism, science isn't the only source of truth. There may be truth apart from science, and it grants, these other areas some minimal rational status without scientific support. But weak scientism still implies that science is by far the most authoritative sector of human knowledge, right? And so again, it doesn't get off the hook because it's suggesting, yeah, in a fight, science wins. Well,
Right.
it still says scientism, right?
Right. And so it doesn't just stop in the laboratory or in the university classrooms. It has infiltrated the church. The late theologian Arthur Peacock explicitly states that theology must be subservient to science. He says there is a strong prima facie case for re-examining the claimed cognitive content of Christian theology. Put a lot of C's in there for me.
Yeah.
In light of the new knowledge derivable from sciences. So here we have kind of, in the best light forward, God has created two books, one of nature and one of theology. And here, Arthur's kind of giving deference a little bit more to the nature standpoint. And again, the science of the day can be repeated and testable. There's no argumentation to go through. There's no kind of anti-realist for your realist, peanut butter and chocolate type deal. And so we must kind of bow to the truth of sciences when that conflict comes into play.
And we need to be careful not to equate science with nature. Right. Science is how we explain nature. Science is, ways to come up with knowledge about nature, but obviously nature is science. So science like that is a methodology.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talked about that last two episodes, actually, last episode and the episode before, talking about that even the scientific method itself is held as a philosophy rather than a science in and of itself. So there's that to go back to in chapter 4 and 5. Well, weak scientism, when believed and put into practice, leads to a constant revision of doctrines that the church has held for centuries under the pressure of scientific political correctness. Thus, the dialogue between science and theology or biblical exegesis is really a monologue, with theologians asking scientists what the latest discovery allows them to teach. And we saw this, and obviously the big one tends to be the infiltration of Darwinian evolution, but even the claims of Darwin have gone passé, and now the evolution has stayed, and we must react to that. But solid state universe comes into play. Big Bang is actually proposed by Christianity, and now we're having to come and try and understand the different facets of quantum physics and fit them into parallel with the Gospels or whatever our concept of God is, and either reason up to God, as some theologians like to do, or kind of find where in Scripture we can find the nth parallel of a dimension out there. So the infiltration of the church is evident among the multiplicity of voices out there.
Yeah. So he says, here's the basic issue. He says the first problem with weak and strong scientism is that it diminishes the intellectual authority of other important fields, and he's going to give us some examples of this later, especially biblical studies and theology. But he says this is not because the arguments for scientism and in science are better, but simply because it's assumed that science by definition has more plausibility and inherent authority. And so with this in mind, he says in this chapter, he's going to give us briefly, he's going to revisit the assumptions of science in light of weak scientism and show why even a weak form of scientism should be rejected. And again, the weak form says that other areas, other disciplines can have truth, so not only science, but if there is a conflict, science wins. Strong scientism says no other discipline can come up with any truth except science. Science is the ultimate purveyor of knowledge, period, right? That's strong scientism. So you can't have knowledge in anywhere other than science. And the weak scientism says, well, some other places can have knowledge, maybe a bit, but if there's a conflict, science wins. That's the basic idea.
Right. So we might want to ask, by what standard?
Yeah.
All right. So why does J.P. Moreland say that we should reject weak scientism? So he's already pointed out science cannot be practiced in thin air. One, it depends on many assumptions. Two, each assumption or presupposition has been challenged. And three, the task of stating, criticizing, and defending these assumptions is a philosophical one, not a scientific one, right? We can't titrate it. We can't scratch test it. We can't break it apart into its various elements. We can't make it go through 3 states of matter, 4 if you're really fun. And so all those things can't be done to the scientific method or to science in general. It's a number of philosophical claims, and that's the where the rejection of maybe you're convinced of strong scientism comes out. But again, he's wanting to ask then where strong scientism rules out these presuppositions altogether, because neither nature nor semantic content of the presuppositions themselves, nor their defense or rejections are scientific matters. Then the question becomes, well, then why reject weak science, which allows for various other ones? Maybe even someday it'll let, a handful of theologians come in and maybe present slightly on the ability to make evolution somewhat of a deist of some kind, maybe, if they're lucky.
Yeah,
they pay their dues.
So again, what he's getting at, and we need to emphasize this because there's always some confusion when you touch the word science, right? He's saying there are assumptions that are the basis of science, and these assumptions are defended philosophically. They're not defended scientifically. And so if strong scientism says only science gives us knowledge or the truth, it dismisses these assumptions because they're not scientific. And therefore, it crashes and burns because if the assumptions fail, if they're not true, then the thing that they're holding up, science, can't hold. So that's what he's trying to get at here with the problem with strong scientism. He says, though, that weak scientism does not get off the hook here just because it allows for some minimal justification for non-scientific claims while retaining the cognitive superiority, right, of scientific assertions. Why? Well, as he's explained in the previous chapter, the conclusions of science cannot be more certain, again, than the presuppositions on which those conclusions rest, right? So science rests, right? Here's my scientific, claim, and it rests on presuppositions, right, that hold up the claim. And of course, if the presuppositions are false or not true, then it can't hold up the scientific claim. That's what he's getting at here. And weak scientism has the same kind of problem.
Again, J.P. Moreland, not a presuppositionalist, but he's welcome to attend our lectures if he so wishes, because it does seem quite a bit like this is paralleling a lot of what we talk about on this side of the fence.
Yeah.
Well, this observation leads to our first lesson derived from getting clear on weak scientism. Advocates of weak scientism are confused about the relative cognitive strength of an assumption and a claim that is based on that assumption. Right. So they think they've got it in the bag. They really do. They've got their claim, and they're kind of Wile E. Coyote. Just don't look down. Don't look down, and
you're
won't.
Good.
So he never quite makes it to the other side, right? Well, weak scientism believes that a claim based on an assumption has greater warrant than the strength of that assumption itself. Well, in reality, though, the claim is only as good as the assumption upon which it rests. Again, put yourself on the house. Which one do you want, the rock or the sand? You may want to shy away from beachfront property if that's all there is beachfront, because soon you'll be a houseboat, right? And because the assumptions, the swimming pool will become bigger and bigger. And because the assumptions are not scientific assumptions, but rather philosophical assumptions, philosophy has a kind of primacy over science, which again were what they were trying to get away from, but lo and behold, we all become philosophers in the end. Therefore, weak scientism claim that science always takes precedence over other disciplines is false, equals zero.
So that's the first lesson, right? There's this confusion between the claim and the assumption. The assumption has to be true if the claim is gonna hold, right? But if the claim implies that the assumption isn't true, that it's based on, then the claim falls as well. So that's the first problem here, or issue, or lesson, he tells us, with the weak scientist. A second lesson, he says, advocates of weak scientism underestimate the rational strength of many of the assumptions of science, and as a result, they do not give those assumptions the cognitive authority that they deserve, right? Remember, the following assumptions of science, he gave us a couple, I think 2 or 3, for instance, the existence of objective truth that has something to do with, matching reality. That's an assumption. Objective truth exists, and somehow it matches with reality. That's an assumption of science. It's not a scientific claim. It's a philosophical claim, right? The general reliability of our sensory and cognitive faculties. Again, that's an assumption of science. When I do science, I'm assuming the general reliability of my sensory, right, and cognitive faculties. Now, that's an assumption. It's a philosophical assumption. It has to be defended philosophically. It's not a scientific assumption. And then finally, the basic laws of logic and mathematics. Again, those are not scientific, right? So each of these assumptions, he tells us, seems to have a cognitive authority that, notice, is virtually unmatched, right? And so because in order for anyone to present reasons for denying one of these assumptions, they most likely will have to use the very assumption that they deny in order to support the reasons for denying it. So they are, they crash and burn. It's self-refuting.
Yeah, it seems to be the shoe that's on the other foot that you don't want to walk on. All right, so the question then comes to be asked by Moreland is, which view makes better sense of reality? Right? That's what the claim is, you have your religion and I have science. Let's see which one wins the day, which one wins out. And so, all right, well, not just, whether you can build the best shoe or, get flying cars to actually fly for once. We're going to ask which avenue can we take to explain it all, the whole kit and caboodle. So the nature of the assumptions of science do not prove the existence of a God, very much like the God of the Bible. But in his view, they provide reasons for preferring theism over scientific naturalism. The assumptions are at home in the theistic worldview, and they fit quite, well, naturally. If God is himself a rational being, then it stands to reason that he would create a rational, orderly universe. If he created us, then it naturally follows that he would give us the proper faculties to know and appreciate the inner workings of his world by thinking his thoughts after him. The existence of objective values makes far more sense if there is an objective lawgiver than if there is not. And again, we talk about this when we talk about the evidence that the ability to know even truth exists in an evolutionary worldview. When evolution, the whole claim is to not make you smarter or righter, but to make you survivable. And so you're not granted truth in that. In fact, we should see various forms of people experiencing different forms of reality, left and right, in order to fit them best into their own environmental establishment, and then hopefully find a mate within that can pass along those genes. But that's not what we find. We find people interacting with nature how we do, with reality, believing it's true, believing that there's materialism, believing that there's values that govern those, and that we're able to know them and have truthful claims about them. So it seems like that for coming up with a claim for all of reality to be able to know it, just that claim alone, it seems like deism or the Christian God offers that very balanced point in his favor.
Right. So notice what at least his argument is the best explanation for, let's say, a rational, orderly universe is theism, right? As opposed to chance or whatever, right? The best explanation for our cognitive faculties being able to do what they do is theism. Right? We're thinking God's thoughts after. The best explanation for moral values, objective moral values, he says, is theism. And so, again, he thinks that, given these things, the theistic position is superior in terms of the best explanation. He says, if we begin in the beginning, there was the logos, then we have reasonable explanations for these various assumptions. But he says if we begin with, in the beginning were the particles or plasma or strings or whatever, it is hard to see how these assumptions could have obtained. And so for at least these reasons, he believes the rational person must reject weak scientism.
Right. So it's not so much the claim of science, as you were putting your hand up, but it's those assumptions underneath it that built it up. Well, let's take a step back and talk about the assumptions, and then let's figure out the structure of an atom. In fact, maybe people that hold to a understanding that God has created the universe might be curious in what fashion he's created the universe, and maybe there's going to be some sort of revolution of a scientific nature that comes about as a result of a group of people that believe those and come about and build it up. And then other people come along after those men have made that scientific revolution and take credit for it because everyone else is dead and they've taken over the institutions that those men built up. Well, obviously that could never happen, but in our sci-fi world, maybe that would be a story for somebody to tell.
All right, so there is his chapter 6 on why weak scientism is no better than strong scientism. It's basically the same thing when you boil it down to it, and so it basically has the same problems and issues that strong scientism have.
Right. And so that will end chapter 6 for us, and we'll move on to chapter 7 next time. As always, caveofthecross.com will have all the episodes of all the books, of all the interviews we've ever done. If you want all the short clips and all the reels, shorts, whatever they call them, those can all be found on our YouTube channel, but the other episodes can be found on Spotify and in MP3 form on your favorite podcast catcher. And so all those are available to you pretty much without. So we are universal, at least in the World Wide Web. So hopefully you'll join us next time, and hopefully you're enjoying this book as we travel on and see why good Christians can be strong supporters of science, but not quite so much of scientism. All right, that'll be it for us this week, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.